worship our King. Come, let us bow at his feet. He has done great things. See what our Savior has done. See how his love overcomes. He has done great things. He has done great things. when I cannot see, you are moving. Even when I cannot hear, you are singing over me. Even when I can't hold on, you won't let me go. You are faithful. You are faithful. Hallelujah. My soul will sing hallelujah. You are good to me. You are faithful. Always faithful. Even when my faith is tried, you're providing. Even though my flesh may fail, you're the strength when I am weak. Even when I run away, you will wait for me to come back home. I'm coming home. Hallelujah. My soul will sing hallelujah. You are good to me. You are faithful. Always faithful. Everything I wanted, everything I needed is found in you, God. Everything I wanted, everything I needed. Everything I wanted, everything I needed is found in you, God. Everything I wanted, everything I needed. Everything I wanted, everything I needed is found in you, God. Everything I wanted, everything I needed. Hallelujah. My soul will sing hallelujah. You are good to me. You are faithful. Always faithful. Hallelujah. My soul will sing hallelujah.
At least to me. All right. Good evening. Welcome. I'm Matthew Allen. This is Mark Ringel. Welcome to our Bible class tonight. Welcome to all of you watching online. We are so glad to have you with us here at Cornerstone tonight. Mark, here we are, the last quarter, the last Wednesday of the quarter, I guess I should say.
Last Wednesday of the quarter, that's right.
Can you believe it? 13 weeks?
I'm ready because I'm hoarse tonight and I don't know how much I can talk. So we'll see.
I'm speechless.
I'm
See,
speechless.
I don't get I get to the end of the quarter and I'm already thinking of the next quarter to teach. I usually don't get a break.
Well, I get a break. So.
Okay. Mark gets a break. Y'all can feel for me.
Well, our lesson tonight's a little different. It's about something we don't really talk about very much. It's God's creativity. We acknowledge it. We know about it. But then it's kind of like, okay, let's move on from there. But as each topic we've talked about every week, it doesn't just stop with God. God has created us in His image, and He's created us with this same capacity for creativity. And we can see what great creativity God has, and yet we usually sell ourselves short, don't we? We think, well, I'm not very creative. Well, I can't do this, I can't do that. Do you think that God has given you no creativity? And if He has, what is it? And if you figure out what it is, what are you doing with it?
I think we all have some level of creativity. Mine is definitely not art. I can draw a stick man, maybe, and you might be able to figure it out. All right, anybody identify with me on that? Okay, Margaret, I just love you. But Margaret, I can't draw, okay? Never have been able to. I had 7th grade art class, and it was, Mark, it was the longest 9 months of my life trying to get through that back in the day, back in the 80s. And
longest 2 years of your school, right?
Huh?
Your 7th grade art was the longest 2 years of your school.
And 7th grade was long anyway, right? I mean, that's like the worst grade ever. But there are other sorts of things out there besides art, obviously, that we can be creative in, and many of us have wonderful talents. And like you said, I think we should be active in exploring what those are and seeing how we could use those to glorify God.
We tend to put a dichotomy between talent and creativity and us, and then our service for God. And often we don't merge the two together, do we? We think anything that uses my creativity has got to be for me. But anything that I do for God can't involve that. Well, of course it can. We just don't think about it. The interesting thing is the first couple of chapters of Genesis talk about 3 great creativities. Well, first, what did God do? He created the heavens and the earth, the first verse of the Bible. And then what did He do as the crowning jewel of His creation? He
Created man and
created
woman.
man in His image. And what's the first command He gave to mankind? What? Be fruitful and multiply, create more people. We've already used the concept of creativity 3 times in the first couple of chapters, haven't we? And we bypass that sometimes and say, oh yeah, that's just the way things are supposed to be. That's not just the way things are supposed to be, that's the way things are.
You know, Mark, you just go back and think about the number one, I think, just from the creativity of the world and the universe and everything in it. Maybe to a degree we take that for granted until we begin to think about the creation of the universe on the scale that it is. It boggles my mind in a lot of ways because I'm just a simple guy, but that we were able to predict a solar eclipse for April the 8th, and it was going to be here in Dayton between 3:15 and 3:17 p.m., and it was going to last for precisely 2 minutes and 37 seconds, depending on where you were inside that zone of totality, they called it. And what was interesting to me was they said the next time that's going to happen will be the year 2099, I believe. It's either 2099 or 2100. I don't plan on being here for that, personally. But they can precisely point to when the next solar eclipse will be able to be right here over Dayton and do that with specificity and do it exactly. how can that be, on that level of scale, to see how that can all be calculated, and it demands a creator, someone with creativity.
The thing that amazes me is people may have no concept of God or desire to serve God, and they serve science. And when they do, they kind of look at the universe like a Hollywood movie. They see a great facade. They see a lot of things that they can look at, but then they think, well, behind all of it is nothing. Or behind all of it is, it all falls apart somehow. As if you could see the back scene, the backside lot of the movie that's being produced. And yet, everywhere you go, God has told us that where can I go to escape from your spirit? Nowhere. But it's not just that. Where can you go to escape from God's creativity? You can go down to the size of an atom now and still see God's creativity. You can expand out the farthest reaches of the greatest telescopes we have, both optical telescopes and radio telescopes. And what do we see? We still see more, and we see God's creativity. It never ends. How do you have creativity that never ends? And it doesn't just, God created the heaven and the earth, and he sat back and watched it all wind down in time. A lot of people believe that. He doesn't. He's creating right now, isn't he?
Yeah. What is the passage? It's in Colossians 1. In him are all things, and they are all held together by him, I believe it is. I'm paraphrasing that. It's in the first chapter of Colossians. And so it implies that there is active participation and knowledge of what's going on presently within the creation, and that God is busy managing those things. Now, ultimately, we're leading toward an end, as we all know what the Bible says is coming for the world that we see. Everything physical is going to dissipate and be burned up. But in the meantime, while we're here, God is managing that creation and maintaining it for us.
We are amazed that no two snowflakes are alike. You ever stop to think about no two people are alike? Even identical twins aren't identical. God has created each one of us separately, differently, and we think, oh, I'm not creative. Well, if you have a talent for art, let's say, and someone else has a talent for art, it may be different talents for art, but are they exactly the same thing? They're never the same thing, are they? How I draw a picture is not the same as, I guess, not the same as Matt draws a
Definitely.
picture. So,
I can draw an X.
we don't think alike, we don't act alike, we don't do alike. Nothing we do is alike. And what do you think drives that, not being alike? Just because we're different? It's the creativity that's been put within us.
And I think one thing about that, you think about the incredible variety, but yet in many ways we're the same, but yet we should see that variety of personality, of individuality, especially when we're talking about fellow humans, and even in the church, our brothers and sisters. We should be thankful for that. What would we all do if we had created a whole world full of you or me? Well, it'd be great if it was me, but then again, the rest of you wouldn't like that, okay? And you could say the same thing, right? And actually, I think if we created a world that was just like me, it'd get pretty boring after so long, right? So it is that variety that shows the infinite wisdom, knowledge, creative power of God. And I do feel that this is something we should learn to appreciate.
And this creativity is even buried inside. If we read it carefully, it's buried inside what Jesus gave as the two greatest commandments. Look at the example in Luke 10:27. He answered and said, this is what the scholar said to Jesus, but Jesus said that's correct. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Well, that doesn't sound like creativity, but it is. If we're all different, we need to love God as we are able to love God, as we understand God. Not the way we want to serve God. We must serve Him as He has asked us to. But our ability to understand God and perceive things about God and explain things about God to other people, and our ability to do things for other people to show our love for them, are endless. So if we're not just physically different from one another, are we spiritually different from one another? In a sense. Are we psychologically different from one another? In a sense. And mentally different? Of course. And the difference really is your own creativity. It's hard when we think about the unity of the body. That's why it's so hard. Why is it so hard for us to get along and think and bring our thinking into one line? Because we all want to be different. And why are we all different? Because we were made different. But God calls us together in spirit.
And, one of the things that happens here too, Mark, is sin gets involved, and it marks us up, it impacts us, it affects us, and that bleeds into our personalities and our collection of life experiences, which challenges us then. If you've been hurt really bad, sometimes we talk about unity, working together. Because of that experience, it makes it more difficult to make yourself vulnerable. And so we have to, those are where we have to trust in God. And one of the things I've seen through the years is how God goes to work in the most difficult of situations between people and situations, and makes a way for that to be reconciled. And we haven't even got to the part of His amazing creativity on what He did to redeem us from sin. And you think about that. God had the foreknowledge and the wisdom before time began, as we've been talking about through this last quarter or so, to create this wonderful way for us to be freed from our sin. And no human could have ever come up with this. That's the amazing thing about the gospel. In every way, the gospel reveals itself as something of divine origin, because it is solely built upon the work of God. Man wants to take it and make it about him. And God says, no, it's about me and my glory and the glory of my Son. And we see that amazing creativity and how He stayed true to His promises and brought it to action and carried it out. No human God has ever given of himself to die for His creation, but our God did.
And you made a point there that we tend to think of things selfishly. When you think of creativity, do you think of it's all about you? Most of us do. When it's creativity, well, I have God time and then I have my creative time to do the things that I want to do to serve me. Where did we get that idea? It's not selfish by nature to be creative. In fact, I'd maintain that creativity is ultimately intended to be an instrument of worship. An instrument of worship. One of Satan's deceptions is he teaches us to think that creative freedom means do whatever you want whenever you want to please yourself. No discipline, no obedience, no submission to God. In reality, it's not about doing whatever we want to please ourselves, but more about wanting to do what God has made us to do or made us able to do, using our talents and abilities. I maintain that one of the most creative beings in the universe is Satan. You think he's creative?
Oh, absolutely, I do. In this regard, he's constantly conniving and looking for ways to gain entry into our heart to persuade us to go against God. And he'll use every scenario, every situation. Satan ultimately is the ultimate opportunist. But you remember there's a passage, maybe you can help me with this, Mark. Again, I'm kind of floating here off of memory. But Paul talks about his schemes and that he can beguile us and basically trip us up. And I want to say it was in one of Paul's letters to the Colossians where he talked about, or not the Colossians, the Corinthians, that he has schemes and wiles of that he can lay out there specifically for us to trap us and lead us off path. So yeah, in that way, I think he is creative.
Would that we'd ever use as much energy and creativity to serve God as Satan does to try to foil God's purpose.
But let me clarify something though, but as far as him being able to create matter and create things, no. He is a created being himself. So he is on a lower level, but he has this power to create scenarios.
He's a creator of
within the
ideas,
creation.
I would
Yeah.
say. He creates ideas that
Yeah.
are false because
Yeah.
he's the father of lies. Whatever he says is a lie. And he can take what's something good and make you believe it's bad. Take something for good use and turn it into bad use because he can trip up your mind into thinking, I shouldn't do that, or that's not to God's advantage or not to my advantage.
So, example here, you have in the lesson on the back of the first page a number of passages. Genesis 3:1. This is where the first sin comes into play with Eve. And if you're familiar with that passage, what Satan does is he takes the truth that God communicated back in chapter 2, verses 16 and 17, and he twists it into an untruth. And basically implies that God is purposely withholding something that Adam and Eve deserve. And so that's his method of operation. And you can go through and look at each one of these other passages. You mentioned he's the father of lies. That's John 8:44. And I believe it's probably the 2 Corinthians 2:11 passage that talks about his deceptive tactics. Peter talks about how he wars against us. And he is our adversary. That's the 1 Peter 5:8 passage that Mark mentions. But all of these are descriptive passages talking about how Satan tries to thwart God's plan at every turn.
And we've learned how to be just like that, haven't we? I think the greatest example that we can see of people using their creativity to fight against God is in chapter 1 of Romans. Verse 20. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals. Therefore God gave them over in the lust of their hearts to impurities. So why did they corrupt this and say, we'll worship an idol? Because they wanted to serve their own selfish pleasures. And those idols will let them do that.
You know, down in verse 30, there's a term that Paul uses to describe these kind of people. First of all, he says, God haters, arrogant, proud, boastful, but inventors of evil. Now, do you see that going on today in the culture? We have people so evil, so away from God, they're actually literally looking for ways to invent things that go against God in this way. And usually it's money or sex or fame or some other vice that motivates them to do these things, because ultimately sin is pleasurable. But just think about the phrase there, inventors of evil.
There's creativity, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's men using their creativity to destroy themselves. It's tragic, but it happens all the time because their creativity is misplaced.
Well, and that goes right along with this number 3 that you have here on the back of page 2. Like all our other blessings, we will all be held accountable for the stewardship of our creative nature. So it's important that we give thought to what we're doing and why we're doing it. And We can certainly take, this is what Satan has always done. He's taken something good that God has given and twists it, perverts it into something God never intended. That's Satan's way. We want to hear from some of you tonight. If you have any questions or comments to go along with the lesson, Ben is back there. He is excited to move that mic around and get you on the audio system here tonight. So if you want to speak out, raise your hand and we'll be glad to take your comment.
You know, I'd venture to say that without creativity, we would not survive.
Right.
Everything that we've accomplished, we look upon our technology as, well, this is amazing. Aren't we wonderful? But most of technology was developed out of necessity.
So circling back to your creativity, so often the joke is there's a thin line between Saturday night and Sunday morning. We've heard that joke so often. But as we've talked about, our love for Christ and God grows. I think that shows really ultimately where we start living every day of our lives and every minute of our life creatively for God in everything that we do, and showing that work to the world that He shines through us. And that was one of the points you made earlier about discipline. Also, the other thing that I think is so amazing is everything that God did had an order, and it was renewable. Whereas everything Satan has done has had disorder in its destruction. And so those two things, I think, are kind of interesting points that were made earlier that could be highlighted a little bit more in detail.
I like that. So order and sustainability, destruction and disorder. I got that going backwards, but disorder and destruction, order and sustainability. And the contrast couldn't be greater. Greg?
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about the human body, and it is just stunning how complex we are. And I spent 30 years in maintaining diagnostic imaging equipment and stuff like that. And all the things that happen in our body, all these different systems that are all working in unison, you know, we're made up of trillions and trillions of cells, and each one of those cells has DNA in it. And that DNA, if you stretched it out, each one of those tiny little cells, that DNA is about 6 feet long. That's how much data is included in that language. And normally, anytime we see a language, we obviously recognize intelligence, you know, unless you're a humanist and you're looking at the human body, you know. But the thing is, God's creativity, you know, our 5 senses are just stunningly impressive. Our ability for our eyes to detect frequency of energy, you know, and the image that ends up in the back of our eyeball, it's actually upside down. Our brain has to turn it around, you know. And the fact that we have two eyes that both of them are oriented in the same, you know, north and south, you know, there's 360 degrees. How can, if it's just an accident, why isn't one of them one way and one another? I mean, when you start thinking about this stuff, it is just mind-boggling, the complexity that God is imposed on matter, because our complexity is not inherent in matter itself. God created matter, then He organized it in a way, and that's why we have everything around us today that's so orderly and impossible to have an effect without having a cause. You know, it's just amazing that people still are so barbaric as to think all this just happened through chance and time.
You know, Greg, I was backing up my trailer. I pull a big cargo trailer sometimes during the week, and was backing up somewhere earlier today. And actually this thought crossed my mind, because you need depth perception when you're backing up something like that, because usually if you hit something, it's not good for you or the trailer. And I was just thinking about, as I was doing that, because I right now I'm getting older and I'm not ready to do bifocals yet, emotionally, mentally, I guess. And the eye doctor, to compensate for that, has adjusted my prescription, at least for now, where one eye does more work than the other. And so if I read, I have to read with my left eye versus my right eye. Anyway,
That's creativity, man.
what she told me when she did this for my contacts was, she says, this will impact your depth perception. She said, you're going to notice it in various ways. She said, one, you'll notice on the golf course, and then she said a few other things, but I've noticed it when I back up my vehicle. And I share that with you because as I was thinking about this afternoon, how amazing it is that God has been able to create that within us, to be able to perceive how far you've got to go and all of that, and that the way we can measure that depth with our eyes. And the idea that just happened, the percentage that would happen without someone designing that is beyond our ability to comprehend. It takes a greater faith, in my judgment, to cancel out God in these creative matters rather than accept what the Bible plainly says by faith. Russ?
We talk a lot about God's creative ability. And we all recognize that, but I think what's interesting is how our relationship with Him draws the creativity out of mankind. I mean, who would have thought that a guy with no power tools, no electricity, no running engines could build a cruise ship?
Yeah.
Basically.
Seriously, yeah.
You know? He did it out of obedience to his Creator. You know, who would think that, look at all the hymns we sing. How many of those were inspired by life experiences or relationship to God that pulled out that thought process that someone penned into a hymn to sing? I've told this story before. I mean, when we were kids, we sang a lot in our house. And I remember one night Dad had pulled the hymnals out and we were sitting around singing, and he said, "Roger, lead us in a song." And he did, and it was horrible. He was kind of at that age where his voice is changing. And we were all, my other brother and I were kind of laughing, because it was pitched really bad and it was awful. And it wasn't long after that, we were at services one night and the whispering starts coming out that we needed a song leader, and Roger was going to lead singing that night. And my brother and I are sitting there thinking, oh boy. I tell you what, he got up there and he did a great job. And from then on, he started being the primary song leader at the church where we grew up. But it was the demand of the hour that pulled that out of him. And I think that sometimes we're resistant to that. We just think, I couldn't do that. And we might surprise ourselves if we really think about all we could accomplish if we let God work within us.
Well, let's build on that idea for a minute. You say God draws that creative ability out of us. I'd go so far as to say in a statement that most of the time when we get into trouble in the church, most of our problems are because we have failed or stopped using our creative abilities. Well, our church just isn't growing. We've tried this program or that program to evangelize people, and it doesn't work. So we're done? Can't you think of some other way to reach out to people? Well, I've tried a dozen ways to reach people in my family for the gospel, and none of it's worked. Are you done? You can't think of anything else? You can't do anything different? Doesn't always mean it's successful, but there's always another way. We can't get along in the church. Is it because we failed to break ourselves down and say, I'll be creative. I'll do something I'm not comfortable doing. I'll go be nice to someone else, and they'll learn to be nice to me. So much of it is when we stop our creative focus, we just refuse to bend, refuse to move forward, or move out of our pathway, that we just can't get things done in life. That's certainly true in our secular life. It's also true, I think, in our spiritual life.
My worst sermon, I can tell you when it was. It was April the 11th, 1995.
Shouldn't we vote on that? Then?
No.
No, okay.
Anyway, let me do the talking here. But it was April the 11th, 1995, and actually it was in Hope, Arkansas. And I don't know if this church still exists or not. It was pretty small then, about 12 people. But they needed a preacher, and so I would drive down and speak for them every other week. And some of my worst preaching was done in Hope, Arkansas. But the one I'm remembering at the moment was the fact it lasted 11 minutes, and it was just sheer torture for me, that whole 11 minutes. I thought when I went into that day that it was going to be an amazing lesson. I was so pumped and ready to go, and got up there, and I mean, it totally bombed. And Becky could probably testify to how bad it was, but she's not in here tonight, so it was bad. And from that, you know, I've been able to grow. But if I had just at that day said, you know what, I just can't do this, and stopped, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have been blessed with the kind of life I've been blessed with.
We have to practice, don't we?
Yeah.
If we're an artist, we practice. If we're a musician, we practice. How about if we use our creative abilities to worship and serve God? Don't you think we might need to practice?
Matt?
Yeah, and I want to touch on something here that we touched on and kind of flew over at the beginning of the lesson. It was talking about God's creativity spiritually. So I know we throw out the passage a lot in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 10 where it says, "For we are his workmanship." Sometimes that term is masterpiece that's used there. And when you think about that, and you think in our world, when an artist creates a masterpiece, they're all individual, right? When there's two masterpieces that look alike, one of them is a fake, right? So when we sit out here and we think of all the people that are in the world and God's ability to create each individual person into their own spiritual masterpiece that doesn't look like anyone else, the ability for that spiritual creation is unbelievable. And that's just a huge, maybe one of the best creations he ever had, is his ability to do that. And I think what we need to be looking for in God is how do we attune ourselves to his creative abilities in each individual person? Because I think oftentimes we look at people and we look at their differences and say, well, they're different, therefore they're bad. But God's looking at everybody and saying they're different, and I'm going to make that into something beautiful, and it's going to be perfect. And we need to be able to conform our thoughts to that, to look at people's differences and say, that's wonderful, that's beautiful. How can we further increase that difference in talent to then serve the purpose of the church and serve God's will?
So certainly in that regard, unity is not uniformity. God has not created us to be a bunch of clones. And that's the beauty of being together in a local congregation, you know, bringing all the people together and functioning as one. That's it's a wonderful thing. Russ?
First, I was going to say, if you would give us an 11-minute lesson, we'd probably appreciate it. It might be your finest hour.
I guess we asked for it.
But the point I was going to make was that we also need to encourage each other to be creative. I'll never forget this. We were assembling in the school building off of Wilmington while we were doing remodeling over on the old building. And that's where we started having the children's little devotional before worship on Sundays. And at the end of that devotional, one of the little boys would lead a prayer. I remember Adam and Cheryl Lohman were worshiping with us. I think it was Chase was called on to say the prayer. And I saw Adam stood up at the side of the auditorium there, and we all listened to him say his prayer. And when he was done, he looked up at his dad, and his dad gave him 2 thumbs ups. And then I'll never forget, at the end of service, we were walking out, and I saw Dick Kelso kneel down to Chase and tell him how wonderful his prayer was. Now, it was just the prayer of a little boy, and I'm sure Chase says much deeper prayers now, but you know, that little encouragement draws that continued growth and creativity out of each other. And we're so quick to criticize. Wouldn't it be great if we were quicker
Yeah.
to encourage.
You know, that idea of spiritual creation is we are God's masterpiece. You know, God has never, we sing about this, God isn't finished with me yet. How could he not be finished with me? He's had 66 years to work on it. He's not done with me? Not at all. I have to think about 2 Corinthians 4:16. We do not lose heart. Though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. How are we being renewed? Physically? No, spiritually. We're constantly being improved. So,
Yep, Becky.
So one of the things that I do in my job is I try to develop and encourage creativity within my students. And one of the things that always kind of comes up is the ability to take risk and to not be afraid and to not be afraid to be different. And I think, when you look at the story of the talents, that fear, I was afraid, so I hid it. And overcoming our fear when we're looking at using our abilities and using our creativity, and being okay with, well, yeah, you're probably going to get some sideways looks from somebody, but having that self-confidence and the confidence and faith in God that you are okay to do that.
You have Acts 9, and I think Tabitha is Jason Schofield's favorite Bible character, because he talks about her a lot, and I think it's well worth it, because you have the story of this lady that had this talent of making quilts and blankets and things just to help people. She used that in the church, and obviously you remember she died. And at her memorial, people were bringing some of the things that she had made, that she had given to them, and she touched their lives by her service. And, as you know from reading through that passage in Acts, Peter raised her back from the dead. But this is a woman who might have thought in the beginning, I don't have a lot I can do, but this is something that could make a difference for somebody, and obviously it did. And that story, the story of that woman, has been preserved for all time, for all Christians to draw confidence from and to overcome, as Becky was talking about, the fear. Well, what if I mess up? What if this first quilt, believe me, if I got to knitting, there'd be some mistakes. It might not be very good, Mark. It might not keep you warm. I don't know.
have you ever gotten a homemade gift from your kids that you ever rejected?
Never. I tell you, I've moved offices a lot through the years, but I had a stash of pictures, hand-drawn stuff that Em and Zach made. I'll tell you, the dearest thing that my kids got me was about 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know where they got it, but Emily and Zach put together a portrait that had me baptizing them. And I've got that in my office, and that's one of my most prized pictures, to see that. And it does my heart good every day to see that. And that was, I guess, Emily's idea, but it means a lot,
There's so many things that we can create. We think about creating a book or an article or writing, but not everyone's a writer. We think about performance. Not everyone's a performer. Writing music. Not everyone can do that. Writing poetry. Not everyone can do that. But there's things that everyone can do. You can create a Christian relationship. You can create a Christian family. You can create a Christian friend. You can create friends in the church and build unity in the church. We don't think of that as creativity, but it is. It involves thinking, planning, trying things, trying new things. That's part of God's given creativity.
Just doing what's right, making those right decisions.
Absolutely.
With the trust that down the line it's going to build. Yes, sir, Chris. Hey, we'll get you a mic. Here comes Eric.
Well, I hate to be the Grinch of Wednesday night Bible class, but I guess my question is, do we think that God's creative ability, spiritual creativity, is winning in today's world? Because I have difficulty with the way things are going in the world and the projections that are in the Bible that many should go down the road that leads to destruction. There will be just a few that will make it in the path of righteousness. And so I worry about that are we working hard enough to influence the creativity, spiritual creativity, to help win souls? Because it seems like we're losing.
Well, that's two different questions. Are we working hard enough? We can only answer that individually. But as far as more people wanting to reject God than save God, we have to understand the battle has already been fought. The battle's already been won. It's already been fought and won. God won. It's just us to decide which side we want to be on, the winning side or the losing side.
And one thing I think, because we do have, there's a movement out there to make things as easy as can be and water down things in religion and what God expects. And I think one of the ways that we stand up to that is we continually emphasize the validity of Scripture and the authority of God's Word. And help people to come to an understanding that this is the standard, okay? This is what we go by. This is unchanging. This is, Jesus said, by this is how we're going to be judged, right? John 12:48, 49. So I don't know if we are doing a good enough job in reiterating to people, we need to be, that this is the truth. This is the standard. This is and if we can get that, ingrained in some young minds, I think it turns the tide back to what we want and all desire. As we look at our country, look, I was in a store today picking up something, and I thought I was going to pull a gun to protect myself. This person came in. I don't know if they were high. I don't know. But it was a scene. And it's one of those moments where the cops take 15 minutes to get there. And in the meantime, we're just all standing there. And I looked at that and I thought, we have a messed up world. And Greg, so you have the mic.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when I was a lot younger, fear of failure really paralyzed me. And, if you want to be somebody who never fails, you're going to be one of two people. Somebody who never does anything or somebody who's dead. We really don't want to be either one of those categories. And fear is the great preserver of life, But at the same time, every time you fail, you're learning a way that doesn't work, and I think about Edison. I think he did like 1,370 some times. He was trying to come up with a light bulb that would work, and a newspaper guy a reporter was kind of agging him and trying to, put salt in his wounds. He says, well, you've tried it 1,370 times and failed, are you going to give up and quit or whatever? And Edison looked him in the eye and he said, I didn't fail 1,370 times. He said, I found 1,370 times ways that it will not work. And he just kept on trying. He was relentless. Just keep pressing it. And it doesn't matter if we have failure in life. It's much better to be somebody who fails than somebody who never does anything.
I think Ben had a comment too. He's back in the sound room. Did you have a comment, Ben? Oh, it was about that. Okay.
Matt has something, and then we're going to have to wrap up. We're out of time.
Yeah, I think important comment about what Chris said, because I want to make sure that this is said. I truly believe that one of the schemes of the devil is to make us feel like we're losing the fight. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like the world isn't going in a terrible direction and it's pulling away from God, because it is. But I think the devil magnifies that. I think he takes the news and social media, and all he's projecting and magnifying is the fact that we're so far away from God. And what that does is it discourages us. It
Yeah.
discourages us, and it keeps us from working because we feel like we're not getting anywhere, we're not achieving anything, no one's out there searching, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
That's not true at all. People are searching every day. And
In
what we can't
fact,
do-
the fields of evangelism are probably more opportunist than at any time in our lives.
And I think that's Paul's encouragement
Yeah.
in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verses 8, where he's talking about afflicted on every side but never crushed. You know, it feels some days where it's like everything is evil, but I tell you what, it's not as bad as it was in the time of Noah, and there was still men standing up and preaching, and they were still teaching, spreading the word, and if they can do it during that time, we certainly can do it now, so we can't be discouraged what's going on. We have to continue.
Well said. Okay. Thank you for your good attention and comments through the quarter. We certainly appreciate that. Let's pause and have a word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for this opportunity to be together tonight. Lord, you are so good to us, and we're thankful that we've been able to talk about a topic regarding you that maybe we don't think about that much, and that's your creativity and that how you blessed us to be creative beings in your image. Lord, help us to use what you've given us as good stewards to bring you glory, and thank you, Lord, for your work inside of us to make us who we are becoming. We pray that we'll cooperate with your will so that we'll bring you glory. Be with us as we leave here tonight. Keep us safe and bring us back together on Sunday. It's in the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your week.
Yet by your wounds our salvation has come. Yet by your suffering our freedom is won. For God has highly exalted your name. He has enthroned you on high. Jesus, the name above all names. God has highly exalted your name. He has enthroned you on high. Jesus, the name above all names. You were despised, you were rejected, Lord, those who passed by even averted their gaze from the sight. Such was the suffering you bore for us. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness.